At issue tonight, Trump's tariffs. Donald Trump is once again threatening Canada, this time as president.
Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years. You can always become a state. And if you're a state, we won't have a deficit, we won't have to tariff.
The Prime Minister says the government is ready to respond.
Canada will have a strong, robust response, because we don't want this, but we will respond if necessary.
How is the government responding to the threats, and will Canada have the right response? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hebert, Andrew Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see everyone, and everyone back in the same time zone and their regular locations. Chantal, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of how the government is responding to these threats that continue, even if there isn't anything that's happened yet?
Well, I think we can dispose of the notion that bolstering forces at the border or doing something about fentanyl, which we should in any event, is going to solve this. That was yesterday's version or the day before. I also don't think that the realm of reason is going to work. What was the deficit, the trade deficit that the president quoted today? Over 300 billion. That's actually not at all within the realm of reality in any way, shape, or form. So I'm guessing the best they can do is to try to speak with one voice and see what happens and when it happens, because February 1st is now the date that's up in the air, but there are other reasons to believe it could come later. It could come, I don't know, tomorrow.
Yeah.
This is not an intelligent process. So the government of Canada and its allies and the premiers can only try to adjust from day to day to reality. And the reality is nothing has happened yet.
Right. But that chaos that he is sort of seeding in within this country and with political leaders, Andrew, is I don't know, is it doing what it's supposed to do, kind of getting everybody worried about things?
Well, I think we have to entertain the possibility that not only that this has nothing to do with fentanyl or migrants at the border, but also that it's not just a threat, that it's something he wants to do because he likes sowing chaos, because he likes tariffs, because he believes in it. Yeah. And certainly it seems to me the most prudent operating assumption is that this is not just a bluff and not just a threat, but he's going to do it. Yeah. And that whatever we do in response, and we should respond, may not succeed in getting him to lift it. In other words, we should be planning for the possibility that these tariffs are going to be around for a while, which means we need to be doing a lot more than just retaliating. We need to be thinking through what we have to do to preserve our competitiveness and preserve our economy in the face of this, because there's going to be a very strong incentive. And it's very clearly part of Trump's plan is if you want to escape the tariff, then you got to invest in America. So that's signaling to everybody who's thinking of where they're going to locate investment. If we're going to have counter arguments to that, tariffs are one factor, but they're not the be all and the end all. But one thing we've got to be addressing, and this was already a big issue in terms of the productivity crisis, the growth crisis, but it's now become times 9. It's now an existential crisis, is we've got to be able to say to people, there are reasons to invest in Canada even with the tariffs. In other words, we've got to be a hyper-competitive economy, hyper-competitive tax rates, hyper-competitive investment climate. We cannot tolerate any of these things like interprovincial trade barriers anymore. We've got to be doing everything, at warp speed to make ourselves such a compelling and attractive place to invest and to do business that even with the tariffs, we can survive and prosper. So that's a much larger agenda than just what tariffs to put on or what export taxes do we put on. I'll just say finally, it sure would be nice to have a parliament sitting that could decide what kinds of measures we're going to put in place, not just in the short run, but for the longer run, instead of waiting, as we're going to be waiting, at least probably until June.
Althia?
I guess a few things. To Andrew's point, I absolutely agree. I think the key point is that we should not just want to court investments because of our proximity to the United States, which has been basically the offering that Canada has been displaying for generations. Some I will say that I think the government is actually seized with that issue. I'm not sure that they're doing enough, but it is on their agenda. Like the cabinet ministers at the retreat this week were talking about that. The premiers are talking about that. But what are they actually going to do about it? Because as we all know, I mean, my very first Canadian Federation meeting I was sent to cover the provinces talking to each other, the number one thing on the agenda was getting rid of interprovincial trade barriers, and that was more than 20 years ago. So
yes,
it's like
me too. Yeah.
this topic that we talk about and nothing ever gets done on.
Can I just say something quickly on that?
Yeah, then I want to let Althia finish. Yeah, quickly.
This might be the moment when we start thinking about things like the peace order and good government power. If we're dealing with this kind of threat to our economy, then different rules may apply and different mechanisms may be available to the feds to try to get rid of some of these trade barriers.
Okay, Althia, continue with your points there.
Yeah, I'd say 2 points. To Andrew's point about Parliament, when we left, Parliament was dysfunctional. It was, stuck in a filibuster that wasn't going anywhere and another one that was on the way. So I'm not actually convinced that Parliament's sitting. I would love to believe what Andrew is saying happens, but it doesn't really. It's a gigantic mess. Committees have turned into just partisan show where no tangible work seems to happen, at least in the lower house. In the upper house and the Senate, it's quite different. On the actual results, I think, we have been talking about this and the political leaders have been talking about this as like action that they are going to take. But frankly, it's action that we are all going to feel. Yes. And it would be helpful if they realize that Canadians are the ones who are going to be choosing to take some action. And that action, there may be things that we as a country will have to acknowledge. And we're starting to see some of the provinces think about this more actively. I think about British Columbia and Quebec, for example. If we are all in this together, and maybe there were things that are, some populations in certain parts of the country were unwilling to say, well, maybe we should build a pipeline going east, or maybe we should invest more money in an energy grid. Maybe now, the stakes have been painted and we all realize that these are sacrifices that we're willing to do with each other because we don't frankly want to be swallowed up by the United States. And we don't want all that investment to drain south.
Yeah, it's beyond saying I'm not going to Florida this year. There's other big national projects we could tackle as a country. Chantal.
Or as in, I didn't have any orange juice this morning. That was one of the answers from François Legault this week. Possibly, probably, but I think in the immediate, I am with Althia on Parliament. I watched some of the interviews Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was giving this week. He was saying, bring back Parliament. In the same breath, he was saying, I want an election. Well, I'm not so sure that it's terribly helpful to bring back Parliament, to divert government's attention to trying not to have a non-confidence vote. And I do believe that Canadians, by and large, and based on polls, want to have a real choice in the next election, not a choice between Pierre Poilievre and nobody. So if that's the point of bringing back Parliament, I'm not convinced that it's a really constructive suggestion. As for an energy grid, a pipeline, I watched the Premier, I think, of Nova Scotia saying the federal government must approve Energy East. I'm sorry, there's no Energy East project on the book to approve. These projects would need to come from the industry. And I'm not convinced that they will be coming anytime soon. So the drill, baby drill, let's copy this. Well, you need companies that believe that it's worthwhile to do this, and I'm not convinced that they will be coming to the fore tomorrow.
I only have about 20 seconds, Andrew.
I don't usually quote Pierre Poilievre, but you don't put the business of the nation on hold for 2 months while the Liberals sort out their stuff. They could have chosen a leader by any number of faster processes than this. They're taking their own sweet time doing it. That's fine from their purposes, but if it means you shut down Parliament for 2 months at a time of national crisis, basically an economic war has been declared on us, that's what you have parliaments for.
Okay. At issue, the next Liberal leader. The deadline to enter the race has now passed. The candidates now making their pitches.
We need a Liberal Party of Canada for the next generation.
For me, a huge emphasis is going to be reviving the party, reviving the grassroots of the party.
We can put this economy back on track as a team.
So So here to break down the race for the Liberals' next leader and next Prime Minister for some time anyway, Chantal, Andrea, and Althia. Althia, where do you think this race is headed from what you've seen this week? A lot of endorsements, certainly more for Mark Carney, but Chrystia Freeland has a bunch too. Where is this going?
Mark Carney has all the momentum. The CBC is located on Queen Street in Ottawa, and just across the street, as we are speaking, there are still MPs gathering. I'm told about 60 caucus members at an event for Mark Carney. One of those MPs actually crossed the street to tell me, this is Cody Blois from Nova Scotia, a rural MP, to tell me that for the first time in 6 years, he was elected in 2019, he feels excited to be a Liberal, and that the people in his riding that, 6 months ago were calling him and telling him, oh, Cody, I'm sorry, but I cannot vote for you. I really don't like your leader, and what is your government doing? Have now signed up for Mark Carney and have donated and are signing up more members, and he feels, the excitement was palpable on his face. So that is happening. It is also really interesting to see some MPs who had announced that they were not going to run again change their mind and now think that their seats basically are winnable under Mark Carney's leadership. Helena in the GTA has said that she's going to run again. I'm told that there is, probably a few others who, definitely one other person, but I will let that person make their own announcement.
Decent of you.
There is a feeling among Liberals that they feel like they have new life. Ms. Freeland's campaign, I don't think anticipated the energy that would gravitate towards Mark Carney. She is trying to paint herself as a grassroots Liberal, which is interesting because she just joined the party in 2012 or 2013, was it? But so there's like this dynamic that I'm not actually sure really exists, because I do think Liberals are thirsty for a win. So I don't know how this kind of focusing in on the grassroots and having conventions and having leadership reviews and formalized conventions. Last time I was at the Liberal convention, I was like one of 3 people in the room, and they didn't have quorum to have policy discussions at 8:30. So I'm not sure how many super eager grassroots Liberals there are. Anyways.
Yeah, and the excitement. Okay, great. Someone feels excited about their party, but there's no public opinion poll at this stage, Andrew, that has shown that anything has changed. We'll see, obviously, as the race goes on.
There's a poll. There's the Ecos poll. Frank Graves is online claiming that the Liberals have pulled within 5 points. Oh, we shall see. That's not being shown in any of the other polls.
No, it's not.
I'm struck by a couple of things. One is if you look at the people supporting Mark Carney, the MPs and cabinet ministers, they both seem more diverse than Chrystia Freeland supporters, but they also seem slightly to the left. He's got Stephen Guilbeault and Mélanie Joly behind him. She's got Anthony Housefather and Yvonne Baker, who wrote that centrist manifesto for the papers the other day. And they're both certainly rowing pretty hard away from the Trudeau legacy, at least so far as he pulled the party to the left. But she seems to be maybe rowing even harder than Carney is at that point. So it's an oddity that the outsider candidate seems to be more the voice of continuity at this point anyway. We'll see what else they come out with, than the longtime loyal lieutenant. It seems more like the change agent in that sense. But I think if you're a Liberal, you're looking at this and you're going, look, Carney has a lot of star power, could also really blow up. He does not speak good French, has never run for electoral office, hasn't wowed people in terms of his speech-making ability. We shall see. So, real potential downside, but also probably more potential upside than Chrystia Freeland. He's got more of the star power, et cetera. And if you're a Liberal, you're kind of going, well, how much worse can the downside be? We're flat on our backs anyway. Maybe take a flyer on this guy who at least can give us some hope.
Yeah, he hasn't done any interviews yet, so that would also be, obviously he did interviews in previous jobs, but not, he did a little scrum today, but he hasn't done an interview yet, so that's significant. And I would suggest too, Chantal, that Chrystia Freeland has to row further away from Justin Trudeau, because she's still very much attached to him in terms of the policies that she once loved and now is ditching.
Yes, but there's a limit to how much you can row when you're tied by a rope.
Yeah.
Let's be serious here. If you Google Chrystia Freeland, you're going to almost always see a picture of Justin Trudeau standing next to her or her standing next to him. And I think many Liberals are saying, well, you know, if you didn't like Justin Trudeau, you probably won't like Chrystia Freeland. And that is a fact of life. I'm not sure that it's the left that is going with Mark Carney, but I think he is getting rewards for being someone who has tried to bring the financial side of climate policy to the fight on the climate front. And that is what brings people like Stephen Guilbeault or Wilkinson over to his side. I have to say a couple of things. One, I think Stephen Guilbeault's endorsement of Mark Carney is actually a service to the party as a whole. Why? Because it says you can walk away from the carbon tax on consumers without breaking up the party. Basically, and that is very helpful. I also believe that the Liberal Party, looking at an election, is pretty happy to have Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney as the lead candidates, because they fit what looks increasingly like the ballot box issue, which is who will best manage the Canada-US relationship. Both of them are qualified for this, which means this is probably not the year for Karina Gould talking about party renewal, because that is the talk you talk when you're going to lose the election and rebuild. And I think the Liberals have started to believe they have a shot at maybe doing better in the election than they ever expected.
Wow. Althia.
I also don't agree on the left-right spectrum with Mark Carney. I think it's too early to tell because he also hasn't actually issued any policies, so we don't know how to gauge that. Because there are people like Cody Blois, for example, seeing as he was comfortable with me talking about him, insisted that I should talk about him. That you know, he's not on the left side of the spectrum, but he did. You know, Mark Carney got Patty Haydu today, so it's a bit of a mixed bag. On the Stephen Guilbeault, I actually think that was a coup maybe for the Conservatives. That was like the only slice of good news they had this week, because in English Canada, Mr. Guilbeault is seen quite differently, especially in Western Canada, than he is in Quebec. And so it was like, I don't know how many Conservative talking point emails I got this week about Mr. Guilbeault, but even there are caucus members who are like, please, Mark Carney, stop standing next to Stephen Guilbeault. So I don't know. I think I think that can work both ways.
At issue, Ontario's leadership. CBC News has learned Premier Ford plans to call an election as early as next week. Ford has been coy, but says he needs a new mandate.
Are you preparing for an election call next week?
Stay tuned. But we need a mandate from the people.
Okay, let's bring everyone back to talk about Doug Ford's calls for a mandate. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Andrew, what's going on here? Is this really about a mandate, or is this about a big, big, fat majority that would be on the other side of the election?
You know, I get called a cynic. But you're not a cynic if you're just simply observing other people being supremely cynical. Doug Ford doesn't need a mandate. He has one. He is the sitting Premier of Ontario with a thumping large majority on which it has, I believe, 2 more years still to run. He's not negotiating for Canada. First of all, he hasn't been tossed out by his party. He's not at 15% in the polls, all the things that are weakening Justin Trudeau. He's not negotiating for Canada. It'd be nice if the premiers presented more of a united front. It'd be nice if we had a government in Ottawa that had a fresh mandate, had a legitimacy of whatever party stripe, but with a fresh mandate. But I promise you, Donald Trump does not care whether the Premier of Ontario is facing 30 members of the opposition across the way at Queen's Park or 10. And so the notion that he's putting out there of everyone has to vote for the Conservatives, everyone has to get behind me because we're in this perilous times and I need a mandate. It's powerful stuff. I don't doubt some voters will succumb to it, but it is the absolute epitome of cynicism.
He has had a strong outing, though, politically.
Yes.
He's looked very good over the past couple of weeks in terms of, being a leader of the premiers, dealing with the Prime Minister, and I don't know, Chantal, what you make of that?
Premier Ford has always wanted, and it is no secret, to manage to go to the polls before Pierre Poilievre possibly becomes prime minister.
Right.
And he ends up in an election campaign paying the bills for whatever the Pierre Poilievre government has done. The Trump's election has actually allowed him to build a narrative around that.
Right.
It may be opportunistic, but if you were an advisor to this premier, you would probably tell him to go for it. Now, if he does go for it next Wednesday, what you will hear that sound, that's the sigh of relief from the NDP and the Conservative boardrooms in particular about their campaign workers being done with an Ontario campaign before we ever go in a federal campaign, because that would be a major problem for all three parties, but in particular for the NDP and the Conservatives. So he would make everyone happy in a partisan way. I understand totally Andrew's unhappiness, which is not based on cynicism, but on what he does see, which we all see.
Yes, yeah. Althia.
Well, I agree with both Andrew and Chantal. I do not think the Premier of Ontario needs a new mandate. That's just an excuse. You tell people. He already has a mandate, and as Andrew rightfully pointed out, he already has a crushing majority government. I think, just to add to what Chantal was saying, Premier Ford, yes, wanted to ensure that he has an election before Pierre Poilievre possibly becomes Prime Minister of the country. He wanted to run against Justin Trudeau when Justin Trudeau was no longer there. Donald Trump is the convenient boogeyman to run against. And why waste that opportunity if you were thinking in crass partisan terms, because that is what the calculation is. And so that's what we're seeing. But there is no actual reason, like Premier Ford has not been impeded in his ability to communicate on behalf of his province.
Quite the opposite, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He seems to be doing a great job at the moment, even fighting for, Ontario's manufacturing sector. So what more does he need? Nothing, except he wants the safety blanket of hopefully, in his mind, getting another 3 or 4 years.
Last word to you, Andrew. There is that crazy rumor that Doug Ford wants to be prime minister one day too, and I don't know if any of that is connected. But I'm just.
Is this French? When I last checked, it was non-existent.
There's also a lot of bad stuff coming down the pike. We're probably heading into a recession.
Yeah.
He's got some investigations coming into some of the goings on in his government.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why he'd like to sort of get the election done before the bad stuff happens.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you all very much. I appreciated all of those conversations. That is At Issue for this week. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you so much for watching.